When we select Rebar, we find that a set of properties appears on the left side. The first category we have is the Rebar data. When we open it, we find a set of properties that we can change in order to modify Rebar. The first one is the Rebar diameter, which is currently set to 10. We can, for example, change it to 16. So we notice that the diameter of Rebar starts to change. The next thing is the value of the bending diameter that we have here. Of course, we have the menu for the bending diameter rule, and we can set it to American. We can also set it to Canadian, or we can set it to British, or we can set it to Egyptian. And of course, when we change this rule, it starts using an equation that takes into account the diameter and the yield to directly calculate and produce the value of the bending diameter. If I choose one of the rules, whether it's American, Canadian, British, or Egyptian, I can't change the value of the bending diameter because it's calculated internally, and at that point, the value of the bending diameter is set automatically. If I want to start changing this number manually, I need to change the mode or rule of the bending diameter to custom. So when I set it to custom, I can then make the value anything I want, 50 for example, or 100. 300. Any number I need, I find that the bending diameter of the rebar I have starts to change accordingly. The next value we have in the rebar data, we'll find the rebar yield stress. Right now it's set to 360 megapascals. We can enter it as 200, for example. The next value is the rebar mark. This shows me the rebar mark, which is the name of the rebar I'm working with. Next, I have the stock length of the rebar I have. Then, I have the shape code for the shape I've drawn. As for the shape code, we find that the generic rebar contains an equation that starts to approximate the shape of generic rebar to the closest official shape code we have. So, for example, if we draw a generic rebar in this way, we'll find that it assigns it as shape code 12. Or if we make a generic straight rebar, we'll find that it assigns it as shape code 0. And if I draw a generic rebar with a random shape that doesn't have a shape code, we find that it assigns it as shape code 99. Sometimes when I have a shape like this is supposed to have shape code 12. If I tweak the shape of the rebar a bit, it might start assigning a different shape code because it tries to match the shape in front of me to the closest corresponding shape code. But let's say, for example, I slightly rotate this shape and I still want it to be calculated as 12. I don't want it to be classified as 15. In that case, we can change the text value of the shape code here ourselves, so we can correct the value that was calculated in the generic report, so that the correct shape code we want to work with comes out. This situation happens when I'm working with a shape code and there's a slight change in the shape code which causes the generic report to start classifying itself under a completely different shape code. At that point, I can, in the generic rebar only, force or manually change the name of my shape code so I can set the exact name I want. And in this case, if we had edited the value of our shape code and want to revert to the original algorithm that calculates it automatically, as soon as we press 0, it will start to generate the correct shape code that was calculated by my algorithm after I had edited it.